Hello, folks. Everybody's coming in here. We're going to give it a minute or two for people to load. And I'm also going to launch a poll here for folks. We're on just topics you guys would like us to cover in some of these boot camps in the future. So we are actually going to take this and decide. I can see people already answering. We're going to take this and actually use it for future topics that we cover. And then today we're going to talk about advisory flows. So I'm going to queue this up, but I want to first encourage you guys to answer. I see a bunch of them coming in here. Oh, wow. Evenly split here. Hold on. I'll show you guys even. You can see the poll. Close Slack and get my Juno app going here. Close all my other stuff. Um, Perfect. And then we'll jump in. I'll give it like a minute or two for people to join here. But love this workflows. Yeah, and like we say this with everything, and I really do mean it. Like the more feedback you guys give us, the better. We will use that to customize not just boot camp, but like we're always talking about that as a team. Like Jack and I, just to bring you in on a super nerdy example, we're talking about how to enter a 1099 miscellaneous in ProConnect and Lacert this morning. And there's some like nuance or judgment in terms of like how you do that. Sometimes in tax software, there's two right answers. And we have to like use our judgment. But my point there is like great feedback from a customer of, hey, I think you might be doing this wrong. And like that comes up when we can't decide if our support team, who, by the way, the person on the support team who was handling this worked at Grant Thornton and like is a actually he's about to get a CPA. And it was a tax professional, but he was like, I can't tell. You know what I mean? So there were certain like where we were entering it, you have to do one more thing to make it push onto the tax return. You have to map it to a schedule. But I just give you that as an example to say that when you give us feedback, we think about it very thoughtfully, and we do our very best to give you guys the content that you need and build a really great product for you. Okay, so it looks like training on workflows is a popular one, although it's pretty evenly split here, especially among the first three. So document extraction and validation and customizing Juno for your firm. Yeah, I love all that. And I want to say out loud, just looking at some of these answers, as you guys come into tax season, even though the product is relatively easy to follow and use, at least I think we've done a pretty good job of that. It is a really complex thing, right? Like if you look at all the different combinations of data that could come in, even off the standardized forms on a tax return, there's something like 15,000 possible fields, right? Or combinations of data. I guess 15,000 like variables, I guess I would call it. And so there's an incredible amount of nuance there, and how we handle information. And in fact, it's like why it's so hard to be a tax professional. Think of like any job where you have 15,000 things you're supposed to know what to do with. And by the way, then that changes every single year as well. And by the way, if you guys have other answers, you can put them in the chat. I'm going to go ahead and end this just in a moment here. Let me just check the chat real quick to see what else is. Okay, perfect. Um, I just see the AI assistants checking in, which is great. Okay, so I'm going to end this poll. Thank you guys for doing that. We will look at this, by the way, and get back to you guys on future topics. But the one comment I was going to make is, this is integral to your process of preparing a return, and there is like a process change, which is really hard when you're, in a business like ours that is very process driven. And you have a like variety of people on your team that play different roles that need to understand a new process. So there is a lift there in terms of like using Juno effectively as a firm. And we've tried to make it as simple as humanly possible to use this product, but it's complicated, right? Like it just is. And so we do our best to like communicate through the binder and some of these other areas. One of the things Jack and I talked about that we'll do as we go down the road is like start to have more instructions in the binder, both about like, hey, this is how we entered this information. And then also if there's like, different ways to enter the information. And then also like, hey, here's what you need to do to finish this K1, for example. Like we see a bunch of footnotes that we've extracted, and here's what you should probably do with that information. Like even giving you a little bit more of like where you might where you might enter that information or how the taxability, like from a taxable perspective, is that relevant information? That's something we're going to be playing around with in the next few months. But our North Star vision at Juno is it like in 5 or 7 minutes that you could do something like 90 to 95% of the data entry on the return. Um, and then our binder will help tell you where the other 5% is and where it needs to go, right? So, and then reviewer will help, make sure that it all got entered correctly on the back end. So that's like our vision, right? And so what I didn't say is 100%. And what I didn't say is, we're not going to tell you what we did with that information, right? We're trying to create a transparent system. So, anyways, I've been ranting probably long enough to start this and for people to join in. But I'm Dave Hayes, the founder of Juno. I'm a CPA. I'm joined, and I will have Jack doing a lot of talking today by our head of AI, Jack Flitcroft, who has been just a really integral part of building this product. He's the brain behind the product there are a lot of other brains that help Jack, but he's the original vision here. Um, yeah, and I guess Jack, do you want to talk about Advisor a little bit at a high level in terms of maybe the architecture of the system? I just want to give people a little background to
Yeah.
how we think about the system, how we built this.
No, absolutely. So, I'll kind of speak on this as far as how AI has evolved over the past few years, right? So we started with chatbots, and what a chatbot really is under the hood is when you ask it something, you are making one call to the AI, meaning it's taking your entire conversation history, it is inputting that into the AI, and then you're getting the output, and that's its response, right? And so for a long time, we've had that with ChatGPT. There's some other products out there like TextGPT and BlueJ and things like that that specialize those models for AI research. But it's still a similar architecture. It's still a similar process where you're doing one input and one output, and you're usually getting like a really detailed or specialized answer. What our vision has been with Advisor is something that can actually take all the context of your clients and information we find on the IRS site, combine that and do some really deep research with it. And what that means is instead of just doing one big input and one big output, you can do that if you have a, SOC 2 compliant AI tool. I believe ChatGPT Enterprise does that. You can upload a tax return to it, and you can ask it questions, and you might be able to get some basic answers back, right? But ultimately, to do some deep research, that won't work. The way that I like to explain to someone the difference between a chatbot and an agent is the difference between when you were in college or in high school and you had 2 hours to finish a 10-page paper or something like that. You're going to start that paper and you're going to type words from the very beginning to the very end and you're going to hit submit. You're not going to go back and do anything else, right? You have 2 hours to finish it. So that's a chatbot. A chatbot just starts and it types everything out very linearly and then it submits its answer. An agent is different. An agent is going to work like a person would, where you're going to be given a prompt or a research topic, right? You might take that topic and create a couple of subtopics you want to explore with it. Each of those subtopics you might look up online. You might read articles, you might read Wikipedia, you might read some books, right? You're going to collect some information and you're going to write a bunch of notes on what you're seeing. And you're going to cite each like piece of information that you like to have. Then, after that's done, you're maybe going to compare at a high level. Hey, I don't like this one research topic. This doesn't apply based on the information that I'm now seeing, but I want to go and research another topic now. And you can do this very iteratively. Once you've got the topics, the subtopics that you would like to be within your paper, you might put it together into a body paragraphs. You might start to organize the research paper together. You might draft the introduction and the conclusion. And then you might even decide at that point, no, you know what? I'm going to scrap the whole thing and restart over based on what I know, right? And this iterative approach, and we put this all together at the end. We review the paper multiple times, we make fixes, we reorganize things as we need to, and everything is cited. It's well researched and understood, and it's built over time in this very human problem-solving way. That's an agent, and that's what advisor is versus a chatbot, like I said, is like writing the paper from start to finish all at once. So when we actually are using Advisor, one of the complaints we get a lot is, "Hey, Advisor takes so long. Like it's taking 10 to 15 minutes. This is like a chatbot. I should be able to get a response quickly." No, we didn't build it to be fast. We built this to be really effective and really deep. And that does come at the cost of time. Now we have Assistant, so if you do want quick tax questions that are more basic, you can ask Assistant, which is a chatbot. It is a one input, one output, and you'll get your output within, 10 to 30 seconds. But advisor is different. Under the hood, there's actually like 200 to 400 AI calls and messages of different AI agents talking to each other, researching information, grabbing bits and pieces from your client context, analyzing that, going back to the client data, pulling it back in, saying, this doesn't make much sense. Let me cross-check that information. Literally 200 to 400 times versus only one in a normal chatbot. So that's the high level way that I would go to think about what advisor is. It's power, the amount of time it takes, and why it takes that amount of time to answer some things.
Yeah, that's helpful. And so, the quick, I'll play that back for the accountants in the room too, because I know it gets pretty technical from an architecture perspective. But in order to be accurate, we allow the system to work longer, right? And so some of these can take 5 minutes, some of these can take 10 minutes. Typically, they're going to be somewhere in that range. And then we have these pre-templated queries that you can run. These are agents. And so what to say what Jack said a different way, like think of this as a series of logical steps, right? And an agent goes through like each of the logical steps versus like just taking one swing at what the right answer is. And if you drop a tax return into ChatGPT as an example, and they've gotten the systems have gotten better about this, but you won't always get accurate outputs. And so there are things that we do on the back end to improve accuracy, some of which Jack mentioned and some of which he didn't, that make the system kind of more effective for it. And just one quick thing before I'll jump into some actual prompts here after this, so we can see the other thing I was going to say though is, you know, I think what we are trying to do with this product is allow you to go from preparing and reviewing the tax return into advisory services more easily. And so there's some amazing research tools. Like I'll use the example of like Ask Blue Jay, which I think is a really great tool for deep analysis of like tax law in different ways. And there are parts of their product that, I really admire. We're not necessarily trying to solve research at that level because what we want to do is really be able to have advisory agents that are a little bit more applicable to research in the context of a client, right? So for example, you can already see some of these like do an analysis on charitable giving, how to optimize deductions for charitable giving, or like tell me the retirement options for this client, and I'll show you the results of some of these so you can see it, or a tax strategy deep analysis. It's looking at tax law, but it's also using the context of a client to give you an answer that's actually relevant to that client. So I think that's the most impactful piece. Like I didn't really send my clients like white papers on particular tax laws. Like frankly, they barely read my emails half the time. So sending them like a 40-page paper on a series of tax court cases, just in my world, didn't really mean anything. And so I didn't want to go build that tool. I'm like, if you really need that, yeah, you can go use I think actually Ask Blue Jay is probably the best one if you want to use that. But there's also like Thomson Reuters and Walters Kluwer's both have a number of products there. But what I was really looking for that I felt was an unsolved problem would be more like what I had to do in BNA or what I had to do like by creating a fake tax return, right? And so to even do a pretty basic projection, I've got to like pull up a tax return. I got to look at the marginal tax rate, or I have to look at like if there were exceptional items last year that I need to exclude this year. I want to be able to do that stuff really quickly so that that email that sits in your inbox for 3 days would be something that you could respond to in 5 minutes. And I'm going to show you a few examples, actually, even from my last few days. I sold my practice, but I have to stick around here for a bit and make sure. So I still get like client stuff that bubbles up to me, which actually is pretty useful, honestly, for Juno at the end of the day. But I have a few live ones. I anonymized them, but that I'll show you guys like from my last few days. So okay, with that, let me jump in. I'll show you guys here. I'm going to use mostly history because it does take a while to run these. So it's like honestly just going to be a lot more fun for you guys if I do this from my history. But I ran, and again, this is anonymized. This is Cheryl last name. We have like quite a few anonymized documents, but they're based on like actual real tax scenarios. And so everything you're seeing here is like actually run on an actual client. These are things I just ran this morning so I could get a fresh set of like anonymized queries that we could look at. And this first one that I ran is like doing an S corp analysis. I've used this one since the very beginning. I think it's really interesting because it's actually a really complex problem, right? You have to take an entire Schedule C and put it on an S corp. And then you have to assume a reasonable salary, and then you have to recalculate all the, QBI, right? And you have to like make a decision about retirement with the S corp. It's just a really interesting thing. And if you did this yourself, like you're going to be spending probably a couple hours on this to do it in a really thorough way. So this is a look at the kind of template of the results that we use. One comment I'll make there is like I didn't have to give it additional context. I just asked it like, hey, if this, how much would Cheryl save by forming an S corp? And it knows to go and look at her Schedule C and run it that way. That's part of what we use to give context. In our system is like a RAG system, and we can kind of like actually optimize it to understand your language and give better context to it to the model. Hopefully, Jack, I got that relatively. I feel like that was a pretty good way of saying it. Okay, so in this though, you're going to see a few things that are really important. So we try to show our work. That's one way of improving transparency is by showing the steps of a calculation, and then we cite if we're looking at tax law here for like reasonable salary. We are going to cite where we got that from so you could go do further research. And I get this question a lot on reasonable compensation. I know there's entire companies that just do reasonable comp. If for some reason, because of the risk or because of a client who wants to have additional assurance, we're not going to go as far as like a reasonable comp report. I would not, have the audacity to say like, oh, this is just as good as a reasonable comp report. Like, if you go get an entire team to work on this and charge you $3,000, you probably will get better information than you have here. But I will say for my purposes, running a smaller mid-sized practice, this is what I really wanted, which is like just I have a general sense of what reasonable comp should be. What I want to send the client is like, what is that based on? Right? Here's the underlying law. And here's the framework that I'm using. And so like that's basically how the product is effectively kind of like constructed. So going from the top though, I'll go just real quick through this, and I'm going to show you guys like 4 or 5 of these over the next 20 minutes. So I won't go into like a ton of detail, but in our free trial, or if you guys, I think everyone here is actually an active customer, you can go in and you can do whatever you want. We don't charge you for anything you do in Advisor. So like go have a heyday with this thing. And I'll show you some examples of how I've used it in the last few days here as we go kind of through the next few minutes as well. So you guys can see what you can really do. But this one would be more of like a deep analysis. And look, the long story short on this one is it's going to give me projected tax savings of almost a couple $1,000s here. This is a Schedule C that doesn't have a ton of income on it. And it's going to say, hey, there are some like additional administrative costs, right? So I tell people this all the time, like, hey, by the way, I got to net out the fact that you are going to have to file an extra tax return, and I'm going to charge you a couple $1,000s for that tax return. It's part of why I like running this analysis so much, right? I get that recurring revenue forever. And so in this case, this thing actually you probably shouldn't do it, depending on your overhead for the S corp. But that being said, it still goes through all the same recommendations it would if the numbers were coming out better. But the your sole proprietorship, so it's kind of explaining what that means. It explains the difference in like effectively getting around to the fact that you're paying self-employment tax. And it shows me also all the business income, so I know what it's using as an assumption for the actual calculation. And that way you don't have to go back to the return and pull that information. Um, it's saying, hey, this I'm assuming that you would take this Schedule C and convert it to an S corp. Then it tells you about like actually, hey, part of being an S corp is you have to have reasonable compensation, and it runs through the metrics for that. It's actually recommending 60% of their net income. I could, by the way, this is a chatbot, right? So I could go back and say like, change the assumptions based on the fact that she takes $30,000 as reasonable compensation. So you can override the system in that way. That's very intentional. We want to provide guidance for you. We're not the final expert. Like you are the final expert. You can change anything in this projection and it will update it for you automatically. So like we're handing you a recommendation and information, but you guys can drive the final scenario plan. And then it's giving me the pro forma here, right, of the impact on the personal tax as well as the tax savings. And then it gives me a comparison of like where that all comes from. And by the way, it's netting out like she's a California filer, so it's actually even like pulling the franchise tax amount because you are going to have to pay for that if you're not a sole proprietorship. So very robust analysis here. And again, like because I can chat back and forth with it, And by the way, it just gives me then like the requirements for filing on an annual basis, which is actually pretty helpful. I don't know about you guys, but I've typed this out like 40 times for clients, and it's actually quite a bit of work. But the point here is you get a comprehensive response. You get to see all the work that's going in there. It knows already to consider things like reasonable compensation. It will give you an idea of that, but you could override any one of those fields. I could also come back here and say, okay, like turn this into an email, right? And take out the bullet points and give me instead, whatever you want to do, like literally anything. I could even turn it into a presentation if I wanted to do that for the client. We did a really great webinar with Stephen Allison a few weeks ago. If people want it, Tanishka can link to it here in the chat. But he just went through like what he does for potential new clients, and basically what he was doing, and we featured it because I thought it was such a cool concept, was building an entire like multi-year tax plan, and then he would charge a couple $1,000s for that, and then that instead of having a $600 tax return, he's getting a $2,000 tax plan, and then I think the 2,000 was each year basically for the first 3 years or whatever, and so he's getting $6,000 instead of 1,500 on those new clients, and he was building that using this, and actually we took part of his approach and built it into the product itself. So this is effectively like the structure of most of our answers. This is one example, and I'll give you guys another quick one from an advisor agent. Jack, anything while I'm pulling this up that I missed on that the first go through?
No, that's absolutely right. I don't think there's anything else to add there right now. But just to reiterate, the difference between the chat and the agent here, real quick at a high level. So we built the chat because there's always these use cases that are really special where you'll want to ask them those things. But the agents are really helpful because one of the techniques or one of the things you've probably heard is this concept of prompt engineering, right? Become good at prompting the AI. We actually don't really believe that that should be a requirement to use AI. We believe that we should be building products and tools that allow you to use them right away without having to be an expert at communicating with some computer system. And so the reason that we've built these agents is that you can click right the agent that you want to run, click the client you want to run it on, and it will go and run it. They're pre-prompted. We've had our in-house CPAs curate those prompts, curate the information it's going to use and look at and the steps it's going to take. But with that said, we still have the chat there for those who want to use the chat for things that our agents might not cover, or for those of you who are more ambitious AI users, power users who want to, prompt it yourself.
Yeah, exactly. You can kind of do anything you want in chat, and then in the agents, we've got some like pre-templated things basically. And this is another example I wanted to give you guys. So this is again like in advisor in the chat area. I literally had a client send me this email. I took out the information about the actual client, but I like no kidding. I just copied and pasted this into the chat agent, and I was like blown away, honestly, by like the quality of the answer it gave me. One, I was also blown away that my client sent me this because it reads like some sort of like nasty CPA exam question. But point being, like this person wanted a very specific analysis, right? And they gave me like what they bought the home for originally. They did some improvements. They are also taking a home office deduction. They took a bridge loan on it, right? And they want to calculate like a break even. They want to consider the brokerage commissions as well as the closing costs, and they want to run two scenarios for 2.4 and $2.5 million. Like this is hilarious to me that I got this email. By the way, it's also like kind of tax season. So this type of email drives me crazy during tax season. I'm like, historically say goodbye to 2 hours of my day. And it probably takes me 4 days to respond to this email or something like that. But instead, I dump it in here, and again, like I'm doing this based on Daisy Duck returns. So this some of this is made up information based on that return, but it will look at, so like when I did this for the client originally, it actually will even go and look at the prior depreciation on the home. So it's going to like calculate the basis off the actual tax return, which is super helpful. Um, and then it's going to go and give me a minimum break even price, right? So let me just make sure it did this. Okay. So, well, there's a discrepancy in home office deductions because it's saying actually like Daisy didn't have a home office deduction last year. So that's weird. But that's because I copied this on top of a dummy return. But it's also like it's calculating things like a capital loss carryover for Daisy, right? She did have a capital loss carryover, and so that's offsetting some of the gain on this home. The other thing on when I did this for my actual client, they had lived there 2 of the last 5 years, and it picked that up off their returns, which Jack, I was like pumped about. I was like, wow, I didn't even, I literally like kind of blew me away that it was even looking at those fields. You see you nodding like you expected that to happen, but I did not expect that to happen. It was like they live in this house, so they actually get a $500,000 exemption from the gain. Um, and because this was a person that had multiple homes and I didn't remember their address, so I didn't know if that they were, I didn't even look to see if it was their primary home, to be honest with you. But point being, the other piece here, so it's going to give me an entire analysis of like break even. It's going to give me the adjusted cost basis, right? All the things that you would expect in this. But my point here is like, if I did this manually, this literally is going to take me, I mean, at least an hour. I think this is probably more like two. Um, to get them a thorough answer. And even if I did a thorough answer, it's not going to be this thorough. But again, like giving you all the steps of the calculation, doing the marginal rates, looking at the individual return for context, like do they live in this home? Do they file jointly? What is their marginal tax rate? Do they have a capital loss carryover? Like, this is why it takes so long to answer some of these seemingly basic questions, right? And in the middle of tax season, this is even more painful. And I was able to dump it in here. It ran for probably like, I don't know, 7 or 8 minutes when I ran this originally. And actually, in the case of the actual client, it looked at multiple years of tax returns, which is pretty phenomenal, and then gave me a really thorough answer back that, by the way, like I charged for, a couple hours of my time to do that. So with my practice, I put in the engagement letter, we charge based on value, and I did this a few years back. And so but I still use hours as kind of how I think about what I charge. And so I was like, this is about 2 hours of work. I'm going to go ahead and charge, $600 basically like my normal rate. And that pays for, some returns in Juno. So like one thing I did last year is I made a point of paying for Juno with additional advisory services that I was charging for. And so when I would do a thorough response like this, I would go and charge typically for 1 hour of my time. Is I feel like, and I had zero people complain about that during the year, by the way, because you're sending responses back that are like this, that are like actually unbelievably detailed. Um, quick comment on this. It calculated, it doesn't show it here because there's this capital loss carryover. Actually, it's kind of interesting. It maybe because it doesn't have the information on the rental property, but one thing it did when I ran this on the actual client is the depreciation recapture as well. It was like there's four types of tax that I'm considering on this. One of them is depreciation recapture. Here's the rate for that. Here's how much is subject to depreciation recapture. So like it is incredibly detailed in terms of what it's providing in terms of information. So this is another really good scenario. And again, this is just the chat. This isn't even like our pre-templated agents, which are actually even because like we've already pre-templated them, they can actually be even more thorough. But another really great example of like this is an email that would have taken, a fourth of my day that I was able to answer in like 5 minutes with this. And then I was going to show you a couple of the advisory agents. I guess, Jack, anything you want to add on that last one that I missed?
Nope, nothing.
Perfect. Okay, so yeah, I was going to look through. Okay, let me do Testy client for Testy. So when you run retirement contribution strategy report, so what we're trying to do with these agents here is give you like an exhaustive amount of information that is again based on the actual client tax return, and give you a whole bunch of like examples of things that they could do, and then it typically ranks it based on potential savings, and it will, as it goes through these different things, it's actually going to give you a link to like a further explanation of how they're calculating the savings, right? And give you like just an incredible amount of information on there. Like obviously it's saying like they're not eligible for a Roth. This is the phase out range for married filing jointly. This is the client's AGI. So like in this case, they can't do, well, at least they won't save money if they do a Roth. They could do a backdoor Roth conversion. And this is kind of how you would file that and what the ROI might look like over time. But again, like it's going through conditionally. So if they have self-employment income, it's going to include like a SEP IRA, or it would include a solo 401k if that's appropriate. And and so it's giving you conditional information, and it gives you conditional savings based on their marginal tax rate. So instead of answering this question of like, here's what you can do to save on your taxes, which can be super time consuming, by the way. And I tend to answer at a very high level, like, hey, you're not maxing out retirement. This can go many, many levels deeper of like, this is how much you could save if you do this strategy, right? And then this is templated, so there's not as much adjustment that you could make, but it is going to go through, an incredibly thorough list of things like defined benefit plans and just a million things that go beyond what I would normally in a typical situation include in my response. So this is one agent. I want to show you also, you can download these, you can copy them, there's an email button to turn them into an email, any different thing you want to do with it. Oh, sorry, that is one comment that I wanted to make. I almost always am editing these things, right? So I will download them. And then I'm gonna edit the response to sound more like it's coming from me. That's super natural. Like at the end of the day, I mean, yeah, over time we will probably make this sound conversational. Maybe someday you could connect it to your Gmail or your Outlook inbox, and we can actually like take the tone of the typical messages that you send. That's technically quite feasible. But and if you download it, it looks like this, by the way. But to me, it's like actually I do want to put the final touches on this. Like again, like AI is amazing today. It is, operates at a level where it's incredible at the research. When the human puts the last touch on it, you're going to get a really good output. And so there are times where I look through these and I'm like, okay, I'm going to take out these 2 points about, take like the rental real estate home sale, right? I cut that down. I took out some of the state information because I didn't want to send them back like a 4 page booklet. Basically, I was like, I want to make this, digestible for the client. So I left like the break even, but I took out the individual state stuff. I did tell them what state taxes they were going to owe, but I took out like the calculation for it. So just to shorten it a little bit. And sometimes on these implementation steps, I will adjust these quite a bit as well. So you can do what you want with these, but just know that like adjusting it is part of the work, right? Let it do 95% of the work and then spend 5 minutes just making sure that you agree with all the recommendations as well as like, taking out some things that might not apply. So on this like tax analysis, you know, hey, this is saying we didn't take a foreign earned income exclusion. Actually, it's like identifying what it thinks could be an error on the return. It also, there's some tax loss harvesting. Depending on the client, I might take that out because they might or might not have opportunities to do that. And I probably would like, for me personally, not put a dollar amount on this. So if I wanted to, I could like delete this out. Sorry, I would delete this in a way that doesn't delete the whole cell. So I could delete it out, leave that blank if I wanted to, or I could take out a couple of these rows, right? If like foreign housing exclusion, okay, if for some reason I know that doesn't apply, I can take that out and then I can delete it out from the report. I'm not going to go through and do that across this entire report, but I just want to say the goal here is to do a boatload of research to give you a ton of information so that you can then optimize that and send what's appropriate off to the client. And we'll pull the context that we can off a 1040. There are times where we don't have enough context to give you a complete answer, or we might have some things that don't apply to this client. Like I know that it's talking about retirement options, but I know they mentioned to me that their cash flow is really tight because they've got young kids right now, and so like doing a SEP IRA and putting $40,000 into it is not an option. So I could adjust this based on that of like, hey, what are the things we can do right now that just simply don't cost additional money, right? So if I wanted to, I could take all these rows. If this person was having cash flow tightness, I could take all these out and just do dependent care and the S corp. And then obviously I'd do the same thing down below. And because these two, like they're probably already spending money on dependent care, right? So this is more of just a reporting thing. And then the S corp salary optimization probably is typically that's reducing their salary. Jack, any comments on like going back and forth with the agents or
Yeah.
optimizing in different ways?
So we're starting to touch on the really important part of this product, which is, yes, we're getting some great information out. How do we digest this and actually give it back to our clients and, make it billable, right? How can you guys provide the advisory services that make sense to a non-tax professional, that they can understand and really feels like you're providing a lot of value rather than throwing them a bunch of information they might not fully digest. And so that's where we get to my favorite part of Advisor is, and Dave often forgets that we actually have this, which is the presentation mode in Advisor. So I see there is a question from Joseph in the Q&A. I'm going to answer this live right now. We do not have presentation mode for the agents that this page is right here, but for chat we do. We are going to be building it into the agents shortly. But Dave, if you want to go back, I don't
Yep.
know if you actually have ran a presentation and have one saved. Let's go
Oh, I
ahead and see if we can
have. Oh, that's a
see if
heck
we
of
can
a
find
question. I
one.
can.
But as
Do,
Dave
do, do,
looks for
do.
this, and if we don't have one, we can actually go ahead and run one. But all you have to do here is, yeah, exactly what Dave is doing. where you select presentation mode. We're going to ask it to turn it to a presentation. This is going to take some time. So by the time that we're done with this
It's
call, we
pretty
will
quick,
have
Jack.
a
Last time I did this yesterday, it was like 3 minutes or something. It wasn't super long.
Okay, well that's fantastic. But what you guys are going to end up seeing is a full client slide deck. What's really cool about this is there's all sorts of other AI tools out there that build presentations, and we're able to basically pull a lot of that technology into Advisor really easily, just so that way we can translate this information, which might be more difficult for a user to understand. And what makes it great that I actually don't know tax that well as the engineer and my engineers is this is our favorite feature. When we're not sure actually about whether or not Advisor is right or not, we often find that using the presentation mode gives it to us in a really digestible and understanding way where we can visualize and see things and understand kind of the story and history of what is going on here and why this might impact us or the client. So you guys are going to be able to do this. Again, there's no limits on the presentation mode. You can do this as many times as you want. You can do it across as many clients as you want. And we're actually we have a couple of like advisor power users who have really helped us and pushed this to its limits. So that way we can develop this kind of product. So it's often that I find people don't even know that Advisor is here. Advisor is here for all Juno users. Um, it is at no additional charge. We at Juno, we believe that our pricing should be really easy to understand and transparent. We don't have any sort of credit-based system. There's no additional cost for this kind of thing. Oh, that was actually incredibly fast.
Yeah,
Some of
it's
my
every
engineers
time
must
I've
have
run it, it's
been,
like 2 or 3
yeah, they must
minutes.
have put some good work into this. But yeah, you guys can see here, this is a full PowerPoint presentation built in, yeah, just a couple of minutes here, which is pretty cool. Dave can
Sorry,
run
my
through the
Microsoft
slides.
wants to update. That was not an error. But yeah, I'll just go through real quick on this. Reasonable salary distributions. These are things they need to know about S corps. This is your projected tax savings. So it's comparing your tax as a sole proprietor to what you'd pay as an S corp. These are the other things, the like new administrative costs that you have and the bottom line financial impact, right? In this case, again, because like I think if we go back and look here as a sole proprietor, it's just such a low amount of actual profit here that in this case it's saying, hey, I wouldn't do it. But that would be the exception. I'm probably not going to run a presentation unless I'm going to actually send it to a client. Um, but then like it gives you through in this case, the recommendation being maintaining a sole proprietorship. But you can see, this is awesome. And I can actually go in and like edit every single piece of this information if I want to adjust it. And I'd highly recommend you guys put your kind of touches on this to make it yours. But you can see like a pretty good starting point here for what you might want to deliver. Certainly like way above what I have done from an advisory service perspective in the past. So pretty amazing to have that in here. We're constantly iterating too. Like this was an idea that came from an actual customer of ours, and we built it in. And then we're going to continue to make it better over time. And by the way, like the underlying technology that we use to do this is also getting better over time, right? So this is going to continue to evolve and improve, but it's already in a really good spot. And one thing, Jack, you said I think is funny. We don't talk about Advisor as much as our other products, and the reason for
Mhm.
that, from my perspective, is where the industry is at. And I think this was like a carbon survey that I saw last year. Something like 70% of small firms basically only provide advisory services around their compliance, meaning like they provide some advice with the return, if at all. They don't have separate advisory service practices or CAS practices. I know there's different terms for it. Um, and so my perspective has been that we got to, first get out of the hole of like just keeping up with our compliance work before we're going to free up the industry to spend a lot more time on advisory service. But one thing I always like to say to folks is like there's two reasons people come and work with an accountant. One is the assurance of knowing it's done correctly versus using like a TurboTax where they could enter their own information, but it could be wrong. And the second is the advice that they get along with the return. So it is really critical that we be advising, especially as AI gets better and TurboTax or whatever tool you want to talk about is going to improve. The human parts of your job become even more important, and that's our vision here at Juno is to like enable, automation so that you can do the human parts of your job. You're not spending all your time doing data entry. So, this supports that very well. But part of why we don't talk about Advisor as much as the other products is because of just where the industry is today. Some firms do a much better job of this than mine did, but I first had to like dig out of the hole of just keeping up with doing tax returns before I had the time and capacity to really focus on advisory work. And so anyways, that's part of why we just talk about it a little bit less than the rest of the product. I'm going to pause there and go back to chat and see if I've got anything. I'm sure we've missed a bunch of questions. Jack, have you been
Yeah,
looking at
Dave,
questions? Do you want to jump in
I
on some of
have
these
been.
or?
There's
Yep.
a couple of folks want to know, how do you charge your clients for the work that Advisor does? I know you had
Yep.
mentioned you typically do an hour, but what are some different things that you've seen? And then I also know that some of our other customers have used as strategies for charging for the work Advisor does.
Yeah, so that's right. I typically, in my engagement letter a couple years ago, I put as we started automating things with Juno, or like to even call it Juno back then is maybe a little bit misleading. It didn't look anything like what we have today. But that being said, I put in there that like we charge on a our rates are based on either the value that we provide with the service, or they may be based on hours. And that gives me the flexibility to basically, go between them. So on a tax return, we move to a fixed rate basis. I do still track hours because I want to know if there's a change in scope, and I don't always get that information from my team. Like I've been like, hey, just put billing notes, like any changes in scope. I find that they just don't do that because they're like on to the next return. So what I do is track the hours anyways because I want to track profitability. And if we're not marking up time, something's wrong, basically, right? So we still use like the our like time and time entry and then the billing rates to calculate what the return should be. And to be honest, like we mark it up 90% of the time now. The other 10, like something has happened where like there's a change in scope, like almost certainly. So I have like a set of rules that my admins follow where like if if we're not marking it up, it should be there should be like an escalation. They should go back to the preparer and say, "Hey, was there a change in scope on this return, or like what happened?" And then the preparer, if there aren't already billing notes, the preparer will add billing notes to it. And like maybe sometimes it's a write down, but most of the time it's not for us anymore. And then that gave me the flexibility when I do work like this. I will basically will send a bill for like $300 and it will be like consultations or something like that. We don't provide a ton of detail there, but it's all about the expectations you create with your customers. I will just say, and I've heard this from like 20 different people, so it's not just me. When I switched, I got like zero feedback from people. I mean, the people that complain about billing are going to complain about billing no matter what, has been my perspective for the last decade. And I actually have like, if someone complains about billing, I have like let me think about this. I have like three steps basically. The first time is I empathize with them and just say, hey, like, it takes time to do my job basically. And I understand that this costs money and sometimes it's not fun to spend money on this, but this is kind of how we work. And if you don't want to work with us, you don't have to. The second, if they continue to push back, I'm like, okay, I will give you a discount, but only this time. And then I have you're out basically if you either can continue to complain about it or if you force a discount. I just will say like we won't work with you going forward basically, the vast majority of the time. So that's a hard thing to say out loud, and I obviously I don't like whatever. These are things that get escalated that are exceptional. But my point there is like I've had very little pushback, but I do fire the clients that complain about price consistently. And I did have people that would complain like every single year, and I was really grateful when I got rid of those folks. You can find new folks, and they're super painful, and I feel bad about that too. Like also, guys, I say with a lot of empathy, like I want to provide a great service for a reasonable cost, but like I got to make a living. You know what I mean? So there were years before I had Juno that like I wasn't making that much money for the amount of hours that I was working, and I really had to fix the way that my pricing was structured. So I had already structured it in a way where I could take advantage of this to a certain extent. If you're just purely hourly, I just would highly encourage you. Like I put that in my engagement letter a couple of years ago, and I got zero questions or comments from my from my clients about it. I do. That's a way to communicate the increase in price from year to year too. I do say like, hey, our even our fixed rate is based on like an underlying philosophy of our hourly rates, and like here's our hourly rates because we do still do some things on an hourly basis, and and then I can indicate a likely increase in their cost, right? Like we're projecting that the average client is going to go up by like roughly 6% this year or whatever it might be, based on this, and here's the underlying rates. So anyways, I was probably maybe a longer explanation than you guys wanted, but that's how I did it. I got no pushback, but I did fire a few clients along the way, but that wasn't about fixed rate versus hourly. I've gotten literally zero pushback for billing for these types of responses. From folks. I've literally never had somebody come back and say, to be honest, like in the past, if the one I did with the email on the real estate piece where someone was selling the house, it would have cost more in the past for me to go through and do that, because I would have been billing on an hourly basis, and that probably would have taken me 2 or 3 hours or something, right? And so like there were times where we were doing projections for people, and it was costing $1,500 to do a projection, and I always felt like, man, this person just wants a quick check-in. Like that's probably not a great value for what they're getting. But at the end of the day, like so what time it takes. So I will say, like, hopefully overall you might see that you can just do a lot more advisory service, right? It's more check-ins with people. It's doing it around the calendar year that will drive that revenue for you. But other people have done that way better than I have. So like if you want to listen to the Stephen Allison webinar, he goes through that in detail, how he prices for advisory services. And that on every webinar we've had a firm owner, they've talked about that a little bit because I find it to be really important for us and where we go as a profession. I'm not the gold standard, so I will say that out loud. And then I did have a question from Karen that I was going to respond to too. Um, the OB3 analysis, yeah, you can run that. It does have 2025 tax law. Um, and I would typically update their 24 return and then ask like, how would this be impacted under 2025 tax law? And it will do that for you and apply the new tax rates, as well as the changes and like deductions and all the different things. So what it can't do, or what it will call out but can't calculate for you, is like a tip credit. What's the other one? Or like the deductible auto interest, just because like it won't have that information, but it will say like, these are other things that have changed. And if you wanted to, you could go in and say, can you update this, assuming that they have this amount of interest or that they get tips, of this amount, and it would then do the rest of the calculation for you. But obviously, like it only has the context it has. So like there are certain times where you got to fill in the blanks for it. And I agree with all the comments, by the way, on it's like, yeah, I always said, like, I just want to be I don't need to be like a Michelin star restaurant, but I don't want to be a buffet of some sort. I want to be something in the middle. Like, I want to provide a lot of value, and I want to be able to charge a reasonable amount for it. I was in the Bay Area, so my prices were pretty high on average, but, compared to the rest of the country, but compared to the Bay, we were very normal. We always wanted to aspire to provide like top 100 firm level advice, but charge, something like 20 or 30% lower than that. So I agree with everybody's comments on there. And Carly, your question, like advisor, so the when you buy credits, the way this works right now is you can run reviewer and you can run advisor, and it doesn't charge you anything additional for that. What uses a credit is when you create a client for preparation and you export that client to your tax software. That if you export like 3 times, it does not use 3 credits. If it's the same client, it just uses 1 credit. But that's the fundamental trigger for us on when a credit gets used, is when you export a client to, the cert or whatever it might be, for the first time. So hopefully that answers everybody. We try to keep our pricing like super simple, right? And so we're really trying to err on the side of keeping that simple. And I'm really proud of that, because to be honest, like even some of our competitors use pricing for like every little, they use a credit system inside their product. And I find that to be like really convoluted in terms of pricing. I just want to know what I'm going to pay for something. So we're trying to keep that simple. Hopefully you guys appreciate that, because we try to like give away stuff for free, actually, even in terms of the K1X partnership, right? We were just like, hey, let's just give it to people, so that we can start, they can start using it and benefiting from it. And we're over delivering on what we told you we were going to deliver when you first signed up. The same is true for advisor. We make this better all the time, and we're not like, charging for the improvements that we're making there. And we'll continue to improve things as we go along. Any other
Yeah,
questions I
and I
missed, or
want
Jack? You want to weigh in on that?
No, and I actually want to make an observation here, which is this is, the third boot camp we've done this week. I appreciate everyone for joining. One of the things that I'm noticing is there's a lot less questions on this one. And I think that actually sort of points to what you were saying earlier about the industry, that this product, Dave and I have talked about this many times in the past. This product is actually like a lot further ahead of, I think, what most of you guys might be expecting or looking for right now. And we're trying to build this for the future of what your firm might appear. And I want to speak a little bit on what the future advisor is, because while we've shown you that we could do some really incredible things with just an individual client and do some deep research and apply it to the client's context and everything else, if you've got, 1,500 clients and you want to be an advisory firm, or even if you're a solo practitioner, you've got 100 or 150 clients, it's still a pain in the butt to sit there, even if you're copying and pasting that prompt all day, to run that across all of your clients and actually try to discover, like, what are the opportunities that I'm looking at for this client. And so the future of advisor is what we call the proactive advisor. Right now, it's reactive, right? It's reactive to what you're asking it to do. But what advisor, we believe, the future of Juno and advisor is to be proactive. So when you have client information coming in, our advisor agents are actually going to run and do analysis under the hood for you and give you reports without you having to even do anything. Right. And so imagine being able to upload 100 different 1040s, wait 24 hours, come back, and you've got, five of these reports for each of those clients. And it's going to tell you exactly what you need to do, what the potential savings are, maybe even how much you could bill. Right. So one of the things that I mentioned in chat is we're working on customization for firms. So that's one of the areas that we're looking to expand into. And so imagine that, like I said, you come in and you have everything here for you, and it's going to tell you exactly what to tell your client. Of course, there's always going to be work to be done. We're not cutting the CPA out of the loop at all. I don't think we'll ever be able to fully trust AI to take this from end to end blindly, right? That's not the vision that we have. The vision that we have, though, is to do all the grunt work under the hood for you, give you and surface you all the insights, and you can make the decisions on what you want to do, what you want to show. And like Dave had shown earlier, that updating that Word file was a perfect example of, hey, I'm just going to talk about these two things. Going through 8 things with my client might be overwhelming. Let me just hit the 2 highest priority things, and we're going to go based on that. Here, advisor, can you make a quick PowerPoint on just these 2 topics, right? You get a 5 slide deck, and that's what you have. So that's really what our vision is for this tool. This is built for multiple years out, not necessarily right now, although we've got some power users who are using a lot of advisor, and they're giving us a lot of feedback, which is really, really cool to see.
Yeah, exactly. And I was going to show one thing, like I'll give you guys a sense of where this goes from my perspective, is in reviewer even, I will start to work in more advisory stuff. So you can already see, um, it's funny. This is I was just doing the tutorial for me. That's a new one. So like I think we'll start to pull advisory in here. One thing we had before we pulled it out for the moment, I think we'll put it back in is like a delivery letter, which will have some tax strategy analysis in here that you could pull from that. And then like as we go down, and this won't happen soon, but it will happen, in the relatively near future. I think you'll be able to pin strategies. So imagine I give you like a tax strategy deep dive, I give you a delivery letter, and I can pin the strategies to a particular client. And then next year, when you get around to doing the return, it remembers the strategies that you were recommending, actually can evaluate whether or not they took advantage of those strategies, right? And you start to get context for every single client. So just that's a bit of a sneak preview of like how we think about where this product goes, um, over the next couple years. That fair, Jack?
Hmm.
If you guys bug
Absolutely.
Jack enough, he'll build it this summer for you. That's just you just have to harass him. But no, that's we love this stuff. Like, and I think advisory should begin at the end of the tax return, right? Like that's where you set the stage for the next few quarters as you go through with that person. And then the other thing I'll say is like as we gather that information, like in reviewer, you're also looking at estimated payments. This is where you see if they have penalties, right? It's like all sorts of things that are going on here that could really help for advisory work. And to Jack's point, like it could be proactive and say like here are advisory opportunities. One of them is they're paying penalties. Like they should do a quarterly check-in. Do you want me to set up reminders, right, for this client to do a quarterly check-in, something like that? So down the road, that's kind of where we'll go with this is, building it into the compliance process over time because AI is pretty phenomenal at what it can do, but we're going to put it in the hands of the actual reviewer, right? Where you could say like, here's 7 strategies you could consider, and then you can like pin them, and that way it's just going to take the 3 that you've approved effectively, and like everything will be done in the context of that strategy. Okay, let me stop this for a second and see if there's other questions coming in. Yeah, if you guys have any other Q&A, definitely let us know. Pro Series, good question, Carol. Yeah, it's on the list. It's literally, I think it's the next one we're doing, right, Jack? We are, so there's a couple moving pieces there. Um, every integration is totally unique, so it's a heavy lift to do those things. Right now, we are going to try to put Pro Series in Q2 and have it ready this summer. That is not locked in just because there's a few moving pieces there in terms of like there's some API access that we might be getting for some of the systems, and we might choose to rebuild those first because an API. If you're using an API, it means you might not have to use the desktop app. And a lot of our issues with the product, if we do have issues, come with the desktop app just because it's running in so many different environments. It can conflict with like the rights that you have or your file structure if you've got like certain security measures in place. Not because we're like doing anything that's not secure, just because like it limits what you can install, right? And so we think that that will really improve the user experience if we can reduce the reliance upon the desktop app. So that being said, Pro Series is definitely on the radar, and it will be the next one that we do. And it shouldn't be too long. Like I think we will certainly have it this year, and I think we may have it by Q2. We're just trying to like we haven't totally finalized the second quarter roadmap. We also right now, just so you guys have awareness, like all the tax software changes right now, and so we're chasing right these changes that happen inside the tax software. So it's hard to even know what I'm going to do next month from a product roadmap perspective because the first thing I want to do is make the product incredibly stable and make sure that all the mappings are like perfect in every piece of tax software. And then we want to expand, like even before we do Pro Series, we want to also expand some forms that we're evaluating so that we can improve like binder and reviewer in different ways to make sure our goal this year is to do, something like 90 to 95% of the data entry on a return in like 5 minutes. And if we can do that, it's going to be a massive value. Supporting an additional piece of tax software, even though it's really important for the Pro Series people, and I totally get that by the way, and I wish I had a Pro Series, I could just snap my fingers and have it. Is not going to matter as much as like making sure we're doing a great job on the ones that we have. It would be our sixth tax software, right? So it's just incrementally better. Whereas if I can improve something for everybody, then it's going to have a bigger general impact for all of our customers. But I
And
empathize with it if we're not working in your tax software. I am sorry about that.
And Dave, real quick, because I have seen a lot of questions on the tax software, how it works with your practice management, everything. Next Monday, if you have detailed questions on our tax software integration specifically, because I'm seeing a lot of questions around that, please come to the Juno Bootcamp. We're going to be focusing on that and the practice management integrations as well. And we're going to also be taking the responses from the survey at the beginning to curate some of these boot camps going forward as well. So appreciate you guys there. But again, next Monday, we're doing a boot camp again on the practice management, but also the tax software integration and how Juno works with those different things. So we'll be able to answer some really detailed questions there. If you have them, please show up.
Yep, exactly. And we'll save these too and send you guys recordings, do all the things. And then we're going to cut this up and use it for the help center and all the things. I appreciate everyone making the time. I know it's a really busy time of year. And if you have other questions too, you can hit up support, like support at juno.tax. We've got actual tax professionals, US based. They're fantastic at answering questions. You can go to your success person as well. And then if you have things that you think might not be working the way you want them to, like we were talking in the very beginning about the 1099 miscellaneous mapping, in that case, I do think we were doing it correctly, but someone was like, hey, if I don't, I don't know if you put it in this other box, then something different is going to happen. And in certain circumstances, that might be the right way to do it. But I use that as an example to say that, sometimes this is an art and not a science, but we're always going to look at your feedback and we're going to evaluate it really carefully and try to do the best we can to also be transparent with everybody. We want to make sure it's understandable. Like if we have a lot of conditional logic in how we export and which field we put certain things in, it can be kind of hard to know what we're doing. So it's not a perfect science. There's always going to be like little pain points there in what we do, but we're trying to communicate what we've done in the binders. So it's really easy for you guys to follow where possible. Um, Perfect. Okay. And then I'm just looking through a few other comments. And by the way, like for boot camp stuff, we'll continue to bring on firm owners who do a better job than I did about like advisory work. Just as an example, like I love, we can't do it for boot camp because it doesn't make sense. This is really training on how to use the product. But in all of our other webinars, everything we do, we are going to be focused on having actual firm owners who have used Juno talk about their experience and how they've applied it. I think it's like way better than listening to me all the time. So we will be doing that in like all of our events for sure. Perfect. Awesome. Well, I really appreciate the time, guys. We are working around the clock, and I know you guys are too, to make this really great for your firms. And I say this every time, and I'm so grateful for everybody that's coming along the journey with us. Please continue giving us really great feedback. It's super helpful. Every time we make the product better because of someone's feedback, it gets better for the entire community. So you're doing everybody a favor when you take the time to send us thoughtful feedback, even if you're not sure if we're doing something wrong. Send it anyways. We love to see it and evaluate it, and appreciate all the patience and the drive to make this thing as good as it possibly can be. So thanks everybody. Appreciate your time, Jack.
Thank you guys.